Welcome to Freya's Fairy Tales, where we believe fairy tales are both stories we enjoyed as children and something that we can achieve ourselves. Each week, we will talk to authors about their favorite fairy tales when they were kids, and their adventure to holding their very own fairy tale in their hands. At the end of each episode, we will finish off with a fairy tale or short story read as close to the original author's version as possible. I am your host, Freya Victoria. I'm an audiobook narrator that loves reading fairy tales, novels, and bringing stories to life through narration. I'm also fascinated by talking to authors and learning about their why and how for creating their stories. We have included all of the links for today's author and our show in the show notes. Be sure to check out our website and sign up for our newsletter for the latest on the podcast. Today is part 1 of 2, where we are talking to Myer about her novels. Over the next 2 weeks, you will hear about writing since middle school on printer paper, knowing when to pull a book down when it's not ready, having your own photo shoot for your cover, learning how to promote your books, blowing up on TikTok for videos unrelated to your books. Just finish your book. Then, you can go back and finish it. Beyond the fame. Rebecca. My life has been a whirlwind of heartbreak, beginning with the death of my brother when I was 18 years old. He was my best friend. I worked through my grief by writing a book about his life, and that book was turned into a movie. That's when I met him. Jensen Bolivar, the movie's director. He's younger than me. Controlling and infuriating. For 4 years, I've denied my attraction to him because every time he shows an ounce of compassion, he takes it away and shuts down. Now we're in Hawaii for our friend's wedding. The hotel has lost my reservation, and Jensen shows up with a solution. You can stay in my suite. Jensen. I grew up fat in fat-phobic Hollywood. All my life I was told to hate myself and my body. Then I met her, Rebecca Taylor. She's beautiful, intense, and makes me feel things I've convinced myself I didn't deserve. So for 4 years, I let her believe I hated her. I don't. I never did. Every time we cross paths, our attraction to each other grows. Last year, we both caved. She let me have a taste. But we weren't ready. Now we're in Hawaii for our friend's wedding, and the hotel has lost her reservation. Good thing my suite has a spare room. Rebecca and Jensen are first introduced in Beyond the Bright Lights. While you don't have to read that book to read this one, it is highly recommended. Beyond the Fame ends with a happily ever after. You'll get more of them in the 3rd and final book of the Off-Script series. This book has adult themes and deals with difficult topics including fat phobia, bullying, terminal illness, cancer, loss of a sibling, loss of partner, loss of a parent, off-page, mentioned, grief, attempted suicide, off-page, suicidal thoughts, addiction and alcoholism, depression, parental abuse, mental, grief, and graphic sex. The podcast is Freya's Fairy Tales, and that is fairy tales in 2 ways. Fairy tales are something that we either watched or listened to or read as kids. And it's also the journey for you spending weeks, months, or years working on your book to then hold that in your hands is also a fairy tale for you. So I like to start off with, what was your favorite fairy tale or short story when you were a kid, and did that change as you got older?
Oh man. I feel like I didn't read fairy tales growing up. I watched Disney movies, I guess. Does that count?
Yeah, that counts.
I feel like The Little Mermaid was always my favorite.
Okay.
And the only way that it's changed now that I'm an adult is I love karaoke as well. So I go and sing Little Mermaid songs at karaoke.
Okay.
Like A Part of Your World or Poor Unfortunate Souls are like my 2 favorite from
Okay.
Disney movies.
So you liked a little bit of both sides. You liked the
Yeah.
Ariel and the Ursula.
Like with Ursula, I can act it out too. But
Yeah.
yeah.
That's way more fun. Way
Plus
more fun.
she's a big lady and I'm a big lady, so
Do you wear, like, purple or the black dress?
I don't, but for Halloween one year, I dressed up as Ursula. I had like the white wig and everything.
Did you paint your face purple?
I didn't paint my face.
I tried to do white one year, I don't even remember what I was trying to be, and I got, like, the cheap white paint, and it just, like, smeared into my skin, it did not work. I'm like, "Note to self, don't get the cheap stuff."
Hmm, hmm.
Alright, so at what age did you kind of start to write?
I remember, I think I was in middle school one day and I just grabbed some like printer paper off our
Mhm.
printer and just started writing with like a pen. Just, I don't even remember what the story was about. And I don't think it made sense at all because my sister found it one day. Like I hid it,
Oh,
and she
no.
found it and she was reading it and she's like, this could never happen. So I guess she was like my alpha reader. So yeah. But I can't remember how old I was. It was definitely like middle school.
Okay, so I think that's pretty much everybody's worst nightmare, someone finding your hidden manuscript.
Yeah.
Like, it
Yeah,
was hidden for a reason.
exactly. Wait, hold on. I actually think I have that.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So you've kept
Here it
it.
is.
Well, that wasn't very hidden.
Well, now it's not hidden because, I live alone. But
Okay.
see, it's like that color printer paper. I don't know.
Oh, like, oh, what is that? The, like, fashion colors ones where you
Yeah,
don't really use that for, like, printing, like, you wouldn't use that for a school project
I know.
usually, but
I don't even know why we bought it.
colored. That's what I get for my daughter to, like, use for crafts and stuff so she can, like, cut it up and do,
Yeah,
different colored stuff.
exactly.
So your first not necessarily first one you published, but how long did it take you to write your first full-length novel?
Well, it's it's weird because like I'd always write and then I wouldn't like finish the story.
Mhm,
And so I would just go back and forth to it whenever I could.
mhm.
So it like took a long time to finish the book, and then I didn't publish it, and so I wrote another one, and then I was like, I didn't publish that one either, and then like 2015 came around. I'm like, you know what? I read about the KDP.
Mhm.
And I'm like, I'm gonna publish this book, and it was horrible. I published it under like another fake name because Meyer's my pen name. It was a plus size book, a book with a plus size main character, and it just wasn't good. I didn't have anyone to edit it because I didn't have money.
Mhm.
Um, and it just wasn't good. So I like unpublished it, and then the pandemic came around, and I work in the news, so like we were covering COVID nonstop,
Right.
and it was depressing. And I'm like, I need to do
An
something.
outlet, yeah.
Yeah. So I returned to one of my unfinished books, and that was the Trinity Found. That's the first book in my Trinity trilogy,
Mhm.
and I finished it. And so I think I started I started back because I only wrote like one chapter, and then I started writing on that again in July of 2020, and then
Okay.
by December 2020 I published it. If that gives you an idea of how long it takes.
So you said you didn't have the first one edited. Did you with the Trinity series, did you know to get an
Yeah,
editor or pay to get an
yeah,
editor?
yeah. So the Trinity Found, I got an editor on Fiverr,
Okay.
but I waited so long. Like my release date was coming up, and I think it was like 2 weeks before I really needed to upload the book.
Mhm.
And he's like, "Oh yeah, I can get it to you, no problem." And he left so many mistakes, but that was my fault
Oh,
because I didn't give him like enough time.
yeah.
And so it came out, and then I think I got it proofread a year after it came out.
Okay.
So like anyone who's publishing and you like you can't afford an editor, just do it, and then go back when you have enough money, get it proofread if you can.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people will use, like, their beta readers to essentially do Now that would
Yes.
obviously depend on the quality of the beta readers that you're using.
Yeah.
If you're using, like, all friends of yours, they may not be the best for finding mistakes like that.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
but yeah, that's a lot of, like, the feedback that I've heard is, like, utilize the people that you know to
Exactly.
help along. Not necessarily like not like, "Hey, you're my friend, you're gonna do this for free," like, that's just rude, but, like, there's a normal publishing-ish process that most indies seem to use that would be helpful if you don't have the money to pay for
Yes.
editors and such.
That is what I always suggest. Like, if you just want to get it out there, use your friends if you can, and then go back and redo it. So another thing with the Trinity book is I tried to make my own cover,
Okay.
and this is what
With,
I
like, Canva?
yeah, just like a stock photo and whatever. I don't
Well,
even
that's
think I
not
used Canva.
bad.
Yeah, so
It's not
this kind of looks
terrible.
like a fairy. So one day, my friend Morgan Rhodes, she's a YA author.
Mhm.
She like messaged me on Facebook because like we're friends, and she's like, "Hey, I see you're trying to do this self-publishing thing, and that's so great. I'm excited for you, but you should really have someone professional do your cover." And I'm like, I am all for having this, like constructive criticism because I didn't know what I was doing.
Mhm.
And so her friend, who's also an author, also does covers. And so that's where the Trinity found. I don't know if I guess I could go back and show you the cover that it was changed to, but so
Yeah, the
yeah,
one
I
that
reached
I've
out.
seen more is the newer one, the Beyond the
Oh yeah, Beyond the Bright
yeah.
Lights.
Yeah.
Uh, so I had a cover artist, and she redid the Trinity covers. So that was my first three books that I released: the Trinity Found, Trinity Returns, Trinity Rises.
And so
And they
you
don't
said you
have
released the first one in 2020. When did you do 2 and
just
3?
Trinity Returns was June June 2021, and then Trinity Rises was March 2022.
That's a pretty good time frame on those.
Yeah.
Pretty quick turnaround.
And then so those books don't have plus size main characters. So I was like, see more on TikTok about plus size main characters, and I'm like, you know what? I wrote that one plus size book in 2015, and it didn't do very well. And I'm like, well, maybe there is a demand for like plus size main characters. So
Mhm.
the first book I ever wrote that I did not publish, I was like, you know what? I'm going to redo this. I'm going to make my character older, and I'm going to make her plus size. And that's where Beyond the Bright Lights came from.
Okay,
So
and
I
so that one well, you said you already had that one, so how long did it take you when you picked it back up to get it ready?
trying to think when I started, because I wrote that all out, like, and then I went back to rewrite the whole thing. Can't remember when I picked it back up though. Well, I released Trinity Rises in March 2021. So it was probably like April.
Okay, shortly after.
Yeah, or maybe it was March, like right before I released Trinity Rises. I went back to rewrite this first book I ever wrote. And then I released Beyond the Bright Lights in August 2022. So August last year.
So you now this one was a little bit different because I think I've seen
Mm.
you talk about on TikTok, you actually, like, hired out to make the cover for the newest
Yeah.
one.
So when I was thinking about the cover, so I have a subscription to Canva, and I bought like a pack of stock photos from deposit photos because you can't just take any photo you find off the internet, right? To make your
Right.
cover. And so I was
Or I
looking at
mean,
like,
you should not because
you
it
should
is
not.
theft.
Exactly, it's illegal. So I was looking at these stock photos, and I was searching for like plus size women, and there are like a few,
Mhm.
but then like they're not really in good poses, and they weren't really what I was looking for because my character was older. And then I wanted to pair them with a male model in a romantic pose, and there was definitely no photos of like plus size women paired with a man like any size. like skinny, big, whatever. There's no stock photos of them together. And I'm
Mhm.
like, what am I going to do for this cover? So like I made a TikTok and I was asking people like, would you rather see a cover that has real people on it, a cartoon cover, or like a discreet cover? And
Mhm.
I was surprised the majority of people said like real people on cover because I feel like people hate real people on the cover. I don't know. And then the photographer who did my cover, she like came across my page. I don't know if she was already my TikTok friend, but she's like, I'll shoot it for you. And I was like,
Okay.
oh, funny. Like, I didn't think she was real. But then I was thinking about it and I was like, and she's in Boston. I'm like, oh, Boston's not that far from New York. Okay, let's talk about this. So like I messaged her and we like had a call and she's like, I've got a girl, and that's Hazel Hellcat is her like pinup, not pinup, she does burlesque.
Okay.
Uh and she shoots with Mitzi all the time. And so I had to find the male model. And I went on Casting Network. There's like a website where you can like find actors and
Models.
models.
Okay.
They're called Casting Networks. Anyways, I posted. Well, I was actually first. I looked through the male models in like the Boston or New York area,
Mhm.
and I found David because he looked the closest to my main character. And I
Mhm.
sent him a message, and I said, "Hey, I would you want to be on a book cover?" And then I explained he would be posing with.
I'm not crazy. This is legit.
I know, I know. I was like, "I'm an author. Do you want to be on a book cover?" And then I made sure to say, you'll be posing with plus size women because men are weird.
Some,
And
yes.
and so I didn't hear back from him for like forever. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess that's my answer. So I
Right.
posted a job listing, and I got I got a lot of responses, like dozens, like 50 maybe responses.
When I imagine in the listing you specified posing with a
Hmm.
plus size woman.
I
Yeah.
did, I did. And there were like a couple guys that I had messaged, and I was like, would you be okay with this? They're like, yes, I would love to do this. And then before I made the decision, David, the first guy I saw and wanted,
Mhm.
messaged back and was like, I am so sorry. I never check my messages here. I would love to do this. And so
Mhm.
that's how that worked out. And I paid them $250 each because it was like an hour's worth of shooting. And then Mitzi had offered to do the photo shoot for like um pro bono. And then she's
Mhm.
just like, pay what you can. So I think I ended up paying her 300 or some dollars.
Mhm.
And yeah, and then I paid my cover artist
To put it all
200.
together.
Yeah. Yeah. And then that's how that came about. And then now that Beyond the Fame's coming out, it's a plus size man on the cover. I ran into the same issues. Like
Yeah, finding
there's even
one
less
and
plus, yeah.
yeah.
There's like even fewer options for plus size male models. And so I made another TikTok video, and one of my followers who beta reads for me
Mhm.
commented Zach Miko's name. And I feel like I'd seen Zach on TikTok before. He is a professional plus size male model. And she was like, Zach would be perfect for this role. And I was like, yeah, but he's like a professional. Like he's famous. He's been on Good Morning America.
You're
They
like, "There's
listed
no way I can afford that," is what I'd be
no,
thinking.
exactly. I was like, there's no way I can afford him. But and so when I finished the book and I was like ready to start the process of doing the cover,
Mhm.
I so first I followed him on TikTok, and then he actually followed me back. I was like, oh, that's good. Okay, that's a good sign. And then when I was ready to do like the cover, I messaged him and I was like, hey, would you be interested in this? And he's like, absolutely, I would, but I am under contract with my agency, so you have to do everything through them. I'm like, okay, so
Mm.
I messaged his agents, and they did not answer me back for like forever. And so I messaged Zach again, and he's like, they have your email. They're just always so busy. I'm like, okay. But he's like, they have your message. They're talking to management about that. I'm like, what does that mean?
Is
But
that
I
a
guess, like,
good thing? Should I be, like, scouting other options? Like
I know, like, I was so and they actually did not give me an answer until, like, the beginning of January, and the photo shoot was for January 17th, so I was like,
Oh my
"What am I
god.
gonna do?" So
Crash course,
finally
just, like,
there
walk down the street looking at random
I
strangers.
know. Well, there were a couple other, like, guys that like, there was some guy named Alex who's, like, a bigger man on TikTok. I forgot his last name, but I think he said he would be interested, but he's also, like, repped by an agency, so I was pretty sure I'd go through the same thing with him.
Mhm.
And then there was a guy in Boston. I think his name is like Chillery Clinton or Chillery Hinton. I don't know, some weird name on TikTok. But he's funny and he's cute and he's a bigger guy. And he said he would do it too. And he was actually in Boston. So I had other options,
Mhm.
but Zach's people end up saying yes, he could do it. They're just like they weren't sure because it is a romantic erotica book, and
Mhm.
Zach is kind of a wholesome. Well,
Oh, so, like, we might ruin his image with this
yeah.
book, basically.
I mean, look, I feel like when people are gonna read it, they're gonna like be picturing Zach the whole time. So like, sorry, Zach, but
So you find him, how'd you find is that one with I don't think I've seen the new cover. Is that one with a female as
so
well?
yeah, the new cover's not out yet, but I did get the results back. So like, I have all the results from the photo shoot, but then I sent the cover to the cover artist, so she's working on that.
So how'd you
Um,
find the female for that one?
so it's a mid-size one. My character's mid-size, so I messaged Mitzi, the photographer, because she did it. She did
The
the cover
first
for Beyond the
time?
Bright Lights. She's doing
Yeah.
it again. But of course, this time, like, she wasn't going to do it pro bono, and I did not expect her to.
Right, right.
so, so she like sent me an option of a girl like she shoots all the time, and I was like, well, she's not quite what I was looking for. And then one day she randomly posted another girl, like not even tagging me or sending me a message. She just
For
posted a
promotion
photo
for
of this.
herself.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I like click on the girl's profile and I like start looking at all her pictures. I was like, she's perfect. And so I messaged Mitzi. I was like, would Amy, her name's Amy, I was like, would Amy be interested in being a model? And so Mitzi like messaged Amy and was like, hey, what are you doing on January 17th by chance? You want to be on a book cover? And Amy's like, absolutely.
It's
So,
such a, like, I imagine, like, if you were in that world, which I'm on the voice side of things, my face is while I do TikTok lives with narrating, like, it's, you're paying for my voice, not my face.
mm,
I imagine, like, it'd be really weird to be, like, suddenly getting into especially if you're, like, used to doing wholesome stuff and suddenly it's like, "Hey." But also, like, every Disney star ever wanted to eventually branch into, like, other stuff, so
yeah.
maybe it's not unreasonable.
Well, I mean, Zach says wholesome, but he just means more, it just leans more towards family friendly. But he
Yeah.
was totally cool with being on a romance book cover.
Mhm.
And it's funny because both Zach and his agent asked me the same question. Is the character a serial killer? Is he a bad guy? I was like, no, he's a good guy. He's just had bad things happen to him. And he's actually a really great guy, my character. So,
So that
so,
that was the line drawn. He just can't be a serial killer.
and then I was thinking, like, sorry, dark romance authors, but
Right?
Zach can't be on your cover.
That's so funny. Uh, that's so funny. I imagine,
Yeah.
like, so I've done, like, narration wise, that's, like, the one thing that people always get, like, do you do, um, some auditions will list up, like, do you have these triggers? Or they'll,
Mm-hmm.
like, if they don't list it on the audition, they'll then come back later and be like, "Hey, are you okay with these triggers?" kind of stuff. So far I have, like, 2 lines that I draw. I'm like, I don't wanna do any, like, legitimate witchcraft books, which for around Halloween, there was a lot of those up. I'm like,
Oh my God.
I'll do fantasy with witches in it,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
but, like, I don't wanna have to learn all the words for spells and junk. And then, like, demons. I don't wanna do, like, real demon worshipy stuff either. I'm
Right.
just like, those are my 2, like, lines of, you can totally be into that. That is I am okay with that. I just don't want to invite that into my life. So,
Exactly.
I'm like, but I've done fantasies with witches in it. I've done fantasies with demons in it. That's
Mhm.
fiction. So,
Yeah, because you could become your own main character in one of those books by summoning a demon
yeah.
and falling in love.
Yeah, yeah, so I just, during that time, I actually did do a, like, ghost audiobook where she, like, moved into an old funeral home,
Oh,
and so there
nice.
was, like, ghosts in the funeral home. That is a whole different ballgame of narrating I found out around that time.
Oh gosh.
I was like, "How do you even do, like, suspense type narration?" I haven't done that yet. I've done all, like, fantasy and romance, which are
Mhm.
similar. Yeah, the answer is most of them are very monotone. I don't do
Oh.
monotone well. I had to listen to, like, 20 books to find someone who wasn't monotone.
Oh my gosh.
I'm like, "Why? Why?" Or, like, they didn't do character voices at all? Really weird.
That's with suspense books?
Yeah, like, suspense thriller is what I was looking
Oh,
at because
yeah.
the ghost house and all that. So you are have you I am so sorry. I did not get a chance because of all the other technology issues I was having to look up
It's
your
like
books. Do you have I imagine you have in ebook and print formats.
mm.
Do you have, like, audio out yet or plans for audio out yet?
So I do have audio out for Beyond the Bright Lights. It came out like a month ago.
Okay.
Um, and I went through ACX,
Okay.
and that was a whole process as
Yes.
well. So I actually found a couple who auditioned, and I asked if they could do a duet narration,
Mhm.
and they said, "Yeah, we live together, no problem." And so I think I hired them around like October, and
Okay.
I was like, take your time. I'm in no rush. I've never done an audiobook for any of my books. Like I didn't do them for the Trinity trilogy because I hardly make any money on those books.
Mhm.
And so I was like, take your time. I'm in no rush. And so after Thanksgiving came around, they messaged me and they're like, we're almost done. And then like a week later, they said all of our system crashed. We lost the majority of the
Oh,
book. I know.
no.
And they're like, we're so sorry. We understand if you want to like cancel the contract. I was like, oh my God, no, don't like, I don't want to, it's not like something you guys were in
Yeah.
control over. And so I was like, do what you need to do. Take your time to I can't even imagine revoicing that. Like I wrote the book and I don't even like rereading it. So I can't even imagine like revoicing it, the whole thing. But they did the whole month of December. And like another thing is the female audio narrator got sick. And I'm like, yeah, I
Mm.
got sick too. So totally understandable. Don't like feel bad about that either. They were just very like apologetic. And I
That's like
appreciated that.
That's my huge thing. Like, I've heard nightmares of like authors that I've talked to on here of like, oh, my editor ghosted me or my
Hmm.
cover artist ghosted me or like, whatever the case may be, audiobook narrator. Um, I'm like, just be like, I had about, I don't know, 3 months into me narrating, my dad passed away. And
Oh
so I
no.
immediately, like literally on our way to the hospital, and I'm like, "Hey, this is what's going on." And all but one book was like, "Just keep going." One was a Christmas book. This was in November. They needed it by Christmas, so I'm like, "I get it. Like, we'll
Hmm.
cancel it. It's fine." Um, but yeah, I mean, like, just it's not that hard to be upfront. I'm currently narrating a series where the narrator ghosted the author for 2 years,
Oh my
like, just
gosh.
disappeared off social media, and so now I'm, like, doing these books, and I'm like, "I'm so sorry that that happened to you." Like, I had worked with her on another book, and I'm like, "You know that I get it done." So,
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
like, "Ugh." Yeah, that's
Yeah.
sickness and stuff happens. Yeah, that's good for you, to, like, understand because
Yeah.
some don't. So
Well, they had already submitted like 5 or 6 chapters.
Mhm.
And so like if they were going to ghost me, they wouldn't have done all that work to begin with. So
Right.
I was like, I totally get it. Take your time. And plus like it was the holidays, it was December. I was like,
Yeah.
I don't want you guys to stress about getting it redone. So just, do what you need to do. But they did it. They got it all done. And I think I submitted it to ACX the beginning of January, and
Mm-hmm.
they take forever
Like
to
two
approve.
weeks ish.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, yeah.
Yeah. That's in fact every book. So technically, in the ACX like contracts, it says that you guys, the authors, have like 10 days to approve it. I'm
Hmm.
like, Thanksgiving hits and I'm like submitting books and I'm like, just get it back to me. January's fine. Like, I understand holidays happen and a
Yeah,
lot of my authors like work in retail, which was insane over the holidays. And I'm like, it's fine. Like,
yeah,
take your time, enjoy it. Don't feel rushed. Like, that's not going to be good for either of us. So,
yeah, yeah.
so, so you had the audiobook made. Now you said you uploaded the chapters. So you actually,
No,
cause
sorry, they did.
okay. Yeah. I was like,
Yeah,
I know
yeah,
typically I do unless you went through them through like something else and then you
yeah.
uploaded it. So you found I think I remember seeing your book, but it was specific about like you wanted a couple and I am not a couple. So
Well, I didn't know I wanted a duet narration, but it just worked out that they were able to do it. Like I wanted a man and a woman, so like
mm,
I was listening to both, the female auditions and then the male auditions.
mm,
There was like another couple that I think submitted, but there was like one of the voices I wasn't a fan of.
mm.
But
I've noticed there's not a lot of couples that work together, but there's a lot of like people that are used to working with like, oh, I
yeah,
really like working with this other narrator kind of situations. I have not done that yet, but like maybe someday, I don't know.
yeah.
So you have the audiobook made. Is book 2 out yet or is it about to come out? Cuz you said you
March the
haven't released.
21st.
Okay. And so you
Yeah.
haven't released the cover yet. When are you
Mm-mm.
doing the big reveal?
Well, I'm just waiting for her to send it. She doesn't really give like dates, my cover
Okay.
artist, like when she'll have it done. But I told her like
You need it
by the
by.
end, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping by the end of this month I'll have the cover to reveal. But it's the manuscript's going to the editor on Monday, so I'm doing like final read throughs right now.
Mhm.
And then she'll take like a couple weeks to get it done, and then once I get the manuscript and the cover, I'll upload everything and then order like author copies so I can send out my physical arcs.
Mhm.
So I'm like dreading that whole thing is like so stressful. Just
So
like,
by the time this airs, that book will actually have released cuz I think this will be in like April or May-ish.
God, yeah, yeah,
So you'll have that book will be officially out and we will know what the
nice.
cover looks like.
Exactly.
So going all the way back to 2015 with that first book,
mm,
what were you
mm.
doing to like promote the book at the time or anything at
Nothing.
all?
No, no,
So
I
who
did
bought
not.
it?
Mostly my family and
Mhm.
friends, honestly. And the very few strangers that did read it, and I remember, and look, I know reviews aren't for authors,
Authors, yeah.
but this was before I knew that because I've learned so much on TikTok. Like I've
Yes.
learned that reviews aren't for authors. I wouldn't have known that because like I'm a new author, but
I
I'm
take
glad
it
I
the
know that now.
same. I do the same for audiobooks, but I do pay attention to see if there's like some, oh my gosh, you need coaching to fix problem.
Yeah,
So like if you were getting a bunch of reviews saying, oh my gosh, this is terribly edited, you should maybe pay attention to that.
right,
Where like
exactly.
one saying, oh my gosh, her voice is so annoying. Well, my voice is my voice, so like
Yeah,
just
that's just your
find a different
preference.
book. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so you weren't really
Um,
doing anything.
No, I did not do anything for that first book. But like the few strangers that read it, they did not have good things to say about it. And
Mhm.
my favorite review from someone was a plus size disappointment. So because it had a plus size
Oh
main character, I'm like, fair, because
no.
I did not I did not do a lot. I didn't do editing with that book. Like I'm sure the characters weren't that developed because that was early on in my writing and I wasn't very strong.
So, what was your reasoning? You said you used a pseudonym. What was your reasoning if your family knew about it? What was your reasoning for using that as opposed to your own name?
So okay. My real name is Edith Taylor. That's no secret. I don't care. You guys want to know who I am? That's me. And then when I lived in Memphis, my friend Hassan he started doing photography, and he would shoot a lot of pinup models, and they would have
Okay.
these cool names like Bobby Baltimore or Ruby Rockets, whatever. And so I was like, what would my pinup name be? And then I was like, Edie Everson. And so that's what I published the horrible book under, Edie Everson. So
Okay.
fake name number one. And then when I started writing my Trinity books, I was like, these are going to be like young adult books. So I probably should write it under like a different name, because Edie Everson, I was like, I'm going to write adult romance books under Edie Everson.
Mm-hmm.
So Settle Myer, I was like, we'll do young adult books. Well, I released the first Trinity book, and then when I was writing the second Trinity book, my characters got horny, and they're older. They were older,
Because
so they
they've
wanted to have
grown
sex.
in a
Yeah,
book.
they weren't really young adult to begin with. Really, they were like 18 in my first book, but it was very like
That's more new
innocent.
adult than
Yeah, it
young.
was like yeah. So Settle Myer just turned into be
All of it.
yeah. And by the time I released the third book and I started writing Beyond the Bright Lights, I was like, I already have a decent following on Settlemire, and I have a website for it. I don't want to go back to Edie Everson
Mm-hmm.
and do a whole new website and try to build up a whole another fan group. So
Right.
I just try to make it super clear in marketing that this is very spicy
Yeah.
compared to my Trinity books. So
Yeah, I think so.
yeah.
Mine, I started, my first 5 books were done under my legal name before I was like, oh, hey, your day job runs background checks sometimes. Maybe you shouldn't be doing all this, because what if they're like, oh my God, you do all these audiobooks and like, we don't want you repping our company because like it's a conflict of interest, which it wouldn't be, but like, companies are weird sometimes.
Mm,
So I started my first podcast under Bree Carlisle, which my family all know about. My conservative Christian family know about. And then I got my first fiction audiobook, like paid fiction, not just podcast fiction. And she's like, oh, hey, I've written like a 50 Shades kind of book, or I'm currently writing this, and like I'd like you to narrate that too. And I'm like, we gonna need a different name because I done let the cat out of the bag with the one. So Freya Victoria, now I'm like thinking about my own books, but I'm like, I have a kid series in mind. So I'm like, we're going to release kid series under the Bree Carlisle
mm-hmm.
name, and then everything else under the name that very few people know about.
Yep.
So, and thankfully, because I've done erotica and stuff at this point, and I'm like, I'm so glad that most of my family has no idea what I'm doing. They know I narrate audiobooks, but what kind? Nope. Nope. And if
I
I can
mean,
help it, they never will.
that's funny. I don't even care. I'm like, I promote it on my personal page. I'm like, it's spice. It's not safe for work. If you
I
want
mean,
a
if
little
they
spice
ask,
with your reading.
my Freya Victoria, like my TikTok, my personal TikTok has like less than 100 followers on it, and Freya's like up over 2,000 something now. So
Nice.
like I've done way better. Now all the other social medias are like none of them have. I haven't figured them out yet. I'm too old for this.
Same.
like like what is social media? I Google everything, like trying to figure out what the trends are,
Mm-hmm.
whatever, and it changes too fast. So it's like just do whatever works for you and go from there. So now you're clearly doing stuff too. When did you stumble into book talk, and how has that helped you with your books?
Um, I created my TikTok, I think in December 2020, right when I released the book, because I was like,
Okay.
I'm only gonna do TikTok for my book. Um, because I was so adamant. I was like, I'm not going to download this stupid app. It's stupid. It
Same.
doesn't make any sense.
I said the same thing.
I'm old. Like I shouldn't be on TikTok. But then I was like Googling how to market my book,
Well,
and
it
TikTok
doesn't
came.
help too that when you do download it, the first things you get are all these comedy and dance things that make
Yeah.
you feel even more like you're too old for it.
No, yeah, I can't do any of that.
So you're
So
Googling.
I Googled how to market my book, and TikTok kept coming up, and I'm like, okay, I can try that. So I downloaded it, and I didn't have a lot of followers at the beginning, as you know, most people. And
Right.
then I posted about a giveaway one day for my first book. And so I posted about a giveaway for my first book, and it didn't get a lot of views.
Okay.
And so I did it again. I was like, I've got this free book. And then suddenly that's the video that like popped off. And I was getting like 20,000 views. I got 20,000 views, all these comments, like, I want a free book, of course. But I only had like a certain amount available.
Right.
And so I commented, I don't have any more books. Thank you to everyone who was like commenting. And then I had to hide that video because people were like, well, if you don't have any more free books left,
Take the
you
video
shouldn't be.
down.
Yeah. So I did. I was like, okay, fine. But I had actually gained enough followers to get 1,000 from that
Okay.
video. And so like I could go live. And then just over the years, I slowly built a following. But it wasn't until last year I posted a video of myself in my new, because I work in the news. So I was in the newsroom, and I sit like, my desk is behind like a camera setup. And so I posted a video about me at work behind a camera on live TV. And that video got like 1.7 million views. And I got
Oh
a
my
lot of
God.
followers from that
It,
one.
unrelated to books at that point, I would
Unrelated to
imagine.
books.
Yeah.
Exactly. But I think that video had pushed me over 10,000 followers. So I like joined the creators fund, but I really didn't make a lot of money on the creators fund. And then I think I ended up getting out of the creators fund because I wasn't making money.
Mm-hmm.
And then I posted the behind the scenes video of the photo shoot for Beyond the Bright Lights.
Mm-hmm.
And that one did like 4.5 million views. So that's like my most ever viral video. And of course, like it came with the fat phobic comments, like,
Yeah. Hey,
why?
hey, the more comments you get, the more they're pushing it. So even
That's
while
true.
that's
Very
like,
true.
I leave comments on now, some comments I will remove because they're just
Oh,
not
yeah.
okay comments.
Oh,
But like
gosh.
ones that it's like, they're like, gosh, you're so terrible. I'm like, oh, it's so, isn't it? Like, this is the snarkiest comments that I'll do. So I have a daily fiction podcast that I do all classic novel, like audiobook style. So each
Hmm.
day, a new chapter of a classic novel. And I'll have people comment and they're like, oh my God, you have all the wrong inflection and your voice is just terrible and blah, blah, blah. So I've gotten to the point where I'm like, isn't it great that we can all have our preferences and you can go find someone else
Hmm.
who you do like? And then in my head, I'm
Exactly.
like, thank you for boosting my video with your stupid comment. Like,
I know, right? That's what I should reply. Thanks for contributing to the algorithm.
yeah. Thank you
But
so much for boosting.
I did delete a lot of the hateful comments. Though it's ridiculous. They were mad because I didn't have another plus size man. Like the male model wasn't plus size. But like, I feel like people always feel like fat people have to be paired
With
with
fat
another fat
people.
person, which is
Yeah.
fine. But like romances happen between all body types. And so that's what I'm trying to do. Like I can only write one book at a time.
I
So
remember the
this
first like fat person book that I read. It was she was overweight, and I don't remember what they describe. It's been like several years since I read this book. But she was overweight, and she decides she's gonna go get healthy. She was very not healthy with whatever it was she was doing. So she's like, I'm gonna like join a gym and start like, working out to get healthy, not to lose weight, just to get healthy. And it's her
Mhm,
and the trainer end up having a thing, not because she gets thin while at the gym, although that was a byproduct of going to the gym like every day.
mhm.
Um, but it was like just this, he liked her at the beginning as well as at the end. Like he's like, I don't care what size you are. Like,
Yeah,
uh, that's like the first book that I've read many since then, but that's like the first one, and probably because it was the first one, it kind of stuck in my head.
yeah,
Who the
yeah.
author was and what the book was, I have no idea. There was a gym involved.
I can't even remember like the first book that was like a really plus size main character. I think like the Sookie Stackhouse books. Did you ever read those?
I got them for Christmas. I haven't read them yet.
So, that was True Blood, was that show was based on those books, but Sookie, the character, was described as like a size 10,
Mhm.
which, now would be considered mid-size. So
Right.
I feel like that's the first book I ever read that had a main character who wasn't like your super skinny main character.
Athletically
Um,
built.
right.
Yeah.
And then in the show, they cast her super skinny, and I'm like, oh, all right, well, but yeah, like back then, there just wasn't a lot of different body types, and so
Yeah.
that's what I'm trying to do. I'm just so like, yeah, Beyond the Bright Lights, it's a plus size woman and a skinny man, and then Beyond the Fame is a plus size man and a mid sized woman. And then the next book will be another plus size woman and a skinny man. But I can only write one book at a time. So maybe I'll write two plus size, a plus size man and a woman. I don't know. I don't know.
Depends on what your characters tell you.
Yeah, I know. It's like I'm such a mood I'm a mood everything mood writer, mood reader, mood TV
Mhm.
and movie watcher. It's
Same.
whatever comes to me.
So funny about True Blood, at the time that was airing, well, shortly after, I don't remember what season it was in, I was in college, and I had this professor, and in those days, like, I think the spiciest thing I'd read was Nicholas Sparks at that time, okay? So I was, like, innocent little brain, okay? And I was homeschooled, like, my entire life, like I already said, conservative Christian family, like,
Hmm.
my little
Hmm.
brain, Nicholas Sparks was the spiciest I'd read. So I had this professor that would go on and on and on about True Blood and how great it was and like all this stuff. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to start watching True Blood. And I didn't even make it through the first episode. My brain was just like, this is too much.
Oh my gosh.
Then I progressively started reading worse stuff. So,
Mm,
like, worse, not bad. I don't think it's bad at all. I think different people have different tolerances for spice, but as things go, when you are used to only reading Nicholas Sparks, you eventually want something slightly worse. So you keep,
hmm.
getting worse and worse. I saw someone on TikTok just describe it as like a cycle, like a circle. Like you'll read worse and worse and worse and worse, and then you need to like mental reprieve from
Hmm.
that. So you go back to like the
Hmm.
sweet romances, then just keep going around.
Yep.
I'm like, yep. So my Christmas book list was a bunch of smutty books, including I don't know if they're smutty, the Sookie Stackhouse books. I also got um, gosh, I can't even think of all the names of them. A bunch that I've now seen on TikTok listed as like, these are super smutty. The Twisted Love series.
Oh
That
yeah.
was, I think I actually got that at my birthday, but like just a bunch of books. And like my husband bought most of them for me. And I'm like, you realize what kind of, like, I gave him access to the list that no one else sees of books from all the TikTok recommendations.
Hmm. Hmm.
And he's like, you just read your porn books. It's okay. Like, whatever.
Oh my gosh.
Settle has always liked The Little Mermaid. The Little Mermaid is a literary fairy tale written by the Danish author Hans Christian Andersen, first published in 1837 as part of a collection of fairy tales for children. The story follows the journey of a young mermaid who's willing to give up her life in the sea as a mermaid to gain a human soul. The original story has been a subject of multiple analyses by scholars such as Jacob Bogild and Pernille Heegard, as well as the folklorist Maria Tadar. These analyses cover various aspects of the story, from interpreting the themes to discussing why Andersen chose to write a tragic story with a happy ending. It has been adapted to various media, including musical theater, anime, ballet, opera, and film. There's also a statue portraying the mermaid in Copenhagen, Denmark, where the story was written and first published. Since we've already done all the versions of The Little Mermaid I could find, today we'll be reading another Hans Christian Andersen story, The Snow Queen. You may know this as the story that inspired the movie Frozen. Due to its length, we'll be splitting this story across Settle's episodes. Don't forget, we're reading Les Morts d'Arthur, the story of King Arthur and of his noble knights of the Round Table on our Patreon. You can find the link in the show notes. The Snow Queen. In 7 Stories, Part 1. Story the first, which describes a looking glass and the broken fragments. You must attend to the commencement of this story, for when we get to the end, we shall know more than we do now about a very wicked hobgoblin. He was one of the very worst, for he was a real demon, One day, when he was in a merry mood, he made a looking glass which had the power of making everything good or beautiful that was reflected in it almost shrink to nothing, while everything that was worthless and bad looked increased in size and worse than ever. The most lovely landscapes appeared like boiled spinach, and the people became hideous and looked as if they stood on their heads and had no bodies. Their countenances were so distorted that no one could recognize them, and even one freckle on the face appeared to spread over the whole of the nose and mouth. The demon said this was very amusing. When a good or pious thought passed through the mind of anyone, it was misrepresented in the glass. And then how the demon laughed at his cunning invention. All who went to the demon's school, for he kept a school, talked everywhere of the wonders they had seen, and declared that people could now, for the first time, see what the world and mankind were really like. They carried the glass about everywhere, till at last there was not a land nor a people who had not been looked at through this distorted mirror. They wanted even to fly with it up to heaven to see the angels. But the higher they flew, the more slippery the glass became, and they could scarcely hold it, till at last it slipped from their hands, fell to the earth, and was broken into millions of pieces. But now the looking-glass caused more unhappiness than ever, for some of the fragments were not so large as a grain of sand, and they flew about the world into every country. When one of these tiny atoms flew into a person's eye, it stuck there unknown to him, and from that moment he saw everything through a distorted medium, or could see only the worst side of what he looked at, for even the smallest fragment retained the same power which had belonged to the whole mirror. Some few persons even got a fragment of the looking-glass in their hearts, and this was very terrible, for their hearts became cold like a lump of ice. A few of the pieces were so large that they could be used as window panes. It would have been a sad thing to look at our friends through them. Other pieces were made into spectacles. This was dreadful for those who wore them, for they could see nothing either rightly or justly. At all this, the wicked demon laughed till his sides shook. It tickled him so to see the mischief he had done. There were still a number of these little fragments of glass floating about in the air, and now you shall hear what happened with one of them. Second story: a little boy and a little girl. In a large town, full of houses and people, there's not room for everybody to have even a little garden. Therefore, they are obliged to be satisfied with a few flowers in flower pots. In one of these large towns lived two poor children who had a garden something larger and better than a few flower pots. They were not brother and sister, but they loved each other almost as much as if they had been. Their parents lived opposite to each other in two garrets, where the roofs of neighboring houses projected out towards each other and the water pipe ran between them. In each house was a little window, so that anyone could step across the gutter from one window to the other. The parents of these children had each a large wooden box in which they cultivated kitchen herbs for their own use, and a little rose bush in each box, which grew splendidly. Now, after a while, the parents decided to place these two boxes across the water pipe, so that they reached from one window to the other and looked like two banks of flowers. Sweet peas drooped over the boxes, and the rose bushes shot forth long branches which were trained round the windows and clustered together, almost like a triumphal arch of leaves and flowers. The boxes were very high, and the children knew they must not climb upon them without permission. But they were often, however, allowed to step out together and sit upon their little stools under the rose bushes, or play quietly. In winter, all this pleasure came to an end, for the windows were sometimes quite frozen over, but then they would warm copper pennies on the stove, and hold the warm pennies against the frozen pane. There would be very soon a little round hole through which they could peep, and the soft bright eyes of the little boy and girl would beam through the hole at each window as they looked at each other. Their names were Kay and Gerda. In summer they could be together with one jump from the window, but in winter they had to go up and down the long staircase and out through the snow before they could meet. "See, there are the white bees swarming," said Kay's old grandmother one day when it was snowing. "Have they a queen bee?" asked the little boy, for he knew that the real bees had a queen. "To be sure they have," said the grandmother. "She is flying there where the swarm is thickest. She's the largest of them all, and never remains on the earth but flies up to the dark clouds. Often at midnight she flies through the streets of the town and looks in at the windows. Then the ice freezes on the panes into wonderful shapes that look like flowers and castles." "Yes, I have seen them," said both the children, and they knew it must be true. "Can the Snow Queen come in here?" asked the little girl. "Only let her come," said the boy. "I'll set her on the stove and then she'll melt." Then the grandmother smoothed his hair and told him some more tales. One evening, when little Kay was at home, half undressed, he climbed on a chair by the window and peeped out through the little hole. A few flakes of snow were falling, and one of them, rather larger than the rest, alighted on the edge of one of the flower boxes. This snowflake grew larger and larger, till at last it became the figure of a woman, dressed in garments of white gauze, which looked like millions of starry snowflakes linked together. She was fair and beautiful, but made of ice, shining and glittering ice. Still she was alive, and her eyes sparkled like bright stars, but there was neither peace nor rest in their glance. She nodded towards the window and waved her hand. The little boy was frightened and sprang from the chair. At the same moment, it seemed as if a large bird flew by the window. On the following day, there was a clear frost, and very soon came the spring. The sun shone. The young green leaves burst forth. The swallows built their nests. Windows were opened, and the children sat once more in the garden on the roof, high above all the other rooms. How beautiful the roses blossomed this summer. The little girl had learned a hymn in which roses were spoken of, and then she thought of their own roses, and she sang the hymn to the little boy, and he sang too. "Roses bloom and cease to be, but we shall the Christ child see." Then the little ones held each other by the hand and kissed the roses, and looked at the bright sunshine and spoke to it as if the Christ child were there. Those were splendid summer days. How beautiful and fresh it was out among the rose bushes, which seemed as if they would never leave off blooming. One day Kay and Gerda sat looking at a book full of pictures of animals and birds, and then just as the clock in the church tower struck 12, Kay said, "Oh, something has struck my heart." And soon after, "There's something in my eye." The little girl put her arm round his neck and looked into his eye, but she could see nothing. "I think it is gone," he said. But it was not gone. It was one of those bits of the looking glass, that magic mirror of which we have spoken. The ugly glass which made everything great and good appear small and ugly, while all that was wicked and bad became more visible, and every little fault could be plainly seen. Poor little Kay had also received a small grain in his heart, which very quickly turned to a lump of ice. He felt no more pain, but the glass was still there. "Why do you cry?" said he at last. "It makes you look ugly. There's nothing the matter with me now. Oh, see?" he cried out suddenly. "That rose is worm-eaten, and this one is quite crooked. After all, they are ugly roses, just like the box in which they stand." And then he kicked the boxes with his foot and pulled off the 2 roses. "Kay, what are you doing?" cried the little girl. And then, when he saw how frightened she was, he tore off another rose and jumped through his own window away from little Gerda. When she afterwards brought out the picture book, he said, "It was only fit for babies in long clothes." And when grandmother told any stories, he would interrupt her with, "But," or, when he could manage it, he would get behind her chair, put on a pair of spectacles, and imitate her very cleverly to make people laugh. By and by, he began to mimic the speech and gait of persons in the street. All that was peculiar or disagreeable in a person he would imitate directly, and people said, "That boy'll be very clever. He has a remarkable genius." But it was the piece of glass in his eye and the coldness in his heart that made him act like this. He would even tease little Gerda, who loved him with all her heart. His games, too, were quite different. They were not so childish. One winter's day, when it snowed, he brought out a burning glass. Then he held out the tail of his blue coat and let the snowflakes fall upon it. "Look in this glass, Gerda," said he, and she saw how every flake of snow was magnified and looked like a beautiful flower or glittering star. "Is it not clever?" said Kay, "and much more interesting than looking at real flowers. There's not a single fault in it, and the snowflakes are quite perfect till they begin to melt." Soon after, Kay made his appearance in large thick gloves, and with his sledge at his back. He called upstairs to Gerda, "I've got to leave to go into the great square where the other boys play and ride." And away he went. In the great square, the boldest among the boys would often tie their sledges to the country people's carts and go with them a good way. This was capital, but while they were all amusing themselves, and Kay with them, a great sledge came by. It was painted white, and in it sat someone wrapped in a rough white fur and wearing a white cap. The sledge drove twice round the square, and Kay fastened his own little sledge to it, so that when it went away, he followed with it. It went faster and faster right through the next street, and then the person who drove turned round and nodded pleasantly to Kay, just as if they were acquainted with each other. But whenever Kay wished to loosen his little sledge, the driver nodded again. So Kay sat still, and they drove out through the town gate. Then the snow began to fall so heavily that the little boy could not see a hand's breadth before him, but still they drove on. Then he suddenly loosened the cord so that the large sled might go on without him. But it was of no use. His little carriage held fast, and away they went like the wind. Then he called out loudly, but nobody heard him, while the snow beat upon him and the sledge flew onwards. Every now and then it gave a jump as if it were going over hedges and ditches. The boy was frightened, and tried to say a prayer, but he could remember nothing but the multiplication table. The snowflakes became larger and larger, till they appeared like great white chickens. All at once they sprang on one side. The great sledge stopped, and the person who had driven it rose up. The fur and the cap, which were made entirely of snow, fell off. And he saw a lady, tall and white. It was the Snow Queen. "We have driven well," said she, "but why do you tremble? Here, creep into my warm fur." Then she seated him beside her in the sledge, and as she wrapped the fur around him, he felt as if he were sinking into a snowdrift. "Are you still cold?" she asked, as she kissed him on the forehead. The kiss was colder than ice, and it went quite through to his heart, which was already almost a lump of ice. He felt as if he were going to die, but only for a moment. He soon seemed quite well again, and did not notice the cold around him. "My sledge, don't forget my sledge," was his first thought, and then he looked and saw that it was bound fast to one of the white chickens, which flew behind him with the sledge at its back. The Snow Queen kissed little Kay again, and by this time he had forgotten little Gerda, his grandmother, and all at home. "Now you must have no more kisses," she said, "or I should kiss you to death." Kay looked at her, and saw that she was so beautiful he could not imagine a more lovely and intelligent face. She did not now seem to be made of ice, as when he had seen her through his window, and she had nodded to him. In his eyes she was perfect, and she did not feel at all afraid. He told her he could do mental arithmetic, as far as fractions, and that he knew the number of square miles and the number of inhabitants in the country. And she always smiled so that he thought he did not know enough yet, and she looked round the vast expanse as she flew higher and higher with him upon a black cloud, while the storm blew and howled as if it were singing old songs. They flew over woods and lakes, over sea and land. Below them roared the wild wind. The wolves howled and the snow crackled. Over them flew the black screaming crows, and above all shone the moon, clear and bright. And so Kay passed through the long winter's night, and by day he slept at the feet of the Snow Queen. Third story. The Flower Garden of the Woman Who Could Conjure. But how fared little Gerda during Kay's absence? What had become of him, no one knew, nor could anyone give the slightest information excepting the boys, who said that he had tied his sledge to another very large one, which had driven through the street and out at the town gate. Nobody knew where it went. Many tears were shed for him, and little Gerda wept bitterly for a long time. She said she knew he must be dead, that he was drowned in the river which flowed close by the school. Oh, indeed, those long winter days were very dreary. But at last spring came with warm sunshine. "Kay is dead and gone," said little Gerda. "I don't believe it," said the sunshine. "He is dead and gone," she said to the sparrows. "We don't believe it," they replied. And at last, little Gerda began to doubt it herself. "I'll put on my new red shoes," she said one morning, "those that Kay has never seen, and then I will go down to the river and ask for him." It was quite early when she kissed her old grandmother, who was still asleep. Then she put on her red shoes and went quite alone out of the town gates toward the river. "Is it true that you've taken my little playmate away from me?" she said to the river. "I'll give you my red shoes if you'll give him back to me." And it seemed as if the waves nodded to her in a strange manner. And she took off her red shoes, which she liked better than anything else, and threw them both into the river. But they fell near the bank, and the little waves carried them back to the land, just as if the river would not take from her what she loved best, because they could not give her back little Kay. But she thought the shoes had not been thrown out far enough. Then she crept into a boat that lay among the reeds, and threw the shoes again from the farther end of the boat into the water. But it was not fastened, and her movement sent it gliding away from the land. When she saw this, she hastened to reach the end of the boat, but before she could so, it was more than a yard from the bank, and drifting away faster than ever. Then little Gerda was very much frightened and began to cry. But no one heard her except the sparrows, and they could not carry her to land, but they flew along by the shore and sang as if to comfort her. "Here we are, here we are." The boat floated with the stream. Little Gerda sat quite still with only her stockings on her feet. The red shoes floated after her, but she could not reach them because the boat kept so much in advance. The banks on each side of the river were very pretty. There were beautiful flowers, old trees, sloping fields in which cows and sheep were grazing, but not a man to be seen. "Perhaps the river will carry me to little Kay," thought Gerda. And then she became more cheerful and raised her head and looked at the beautiful green banks. And so the boat sailed on for hours. At length, she came to a large cherry orchard, in which stood a small red house with strange red and blue windows. It had also a thatched roof, and outside were 2 wooden soldiers that presented arms to her as she sailed past. Gerda called out to them, for she thought they were alive, but of course they did not answer. And as the boat drifted nearer to the shore, she saw what they really were. Then Gerda called still louder, and there came a very old woman out of the house, leaning on a crutch. She wore a large hat to shade her from the sun, and on it were painted all sorts of pretty flowers. "You poor little child," said the old woman. "How did you manage to come all this distance into the wide world on such a rapid rolling stream?" And then the old woman walked in the water, seized the boat with her crutch, drew it to land, and lifted Gerda out. And Gerda was glad to feel herself on dry ground, although she was rather afraid of the strange old woman. "Come and tell me who you are," said she, "and how you came here." Then Gerda told her everything, while the old woman shook her head and said, "Hem, hem." And when she had finished, Gerda asked if she had not seen little Kay, and the old woman told her he had not passed by that way, but he very likely would come. So she told Gerda not to be sorrowful, but to taste the cherries and look at the flowers. They were better than any picture book, for each of them could tell a story. Then she took Gerda by the hand and led her into the little house, and the old woman closed the door. The windows were very high, and as the panes were red, blue, and yellow, the daylight shone through them in all sorts of singular colors. On the table stood beautiful cherries, and Gerda had permission to eat as many as she would. While she was eating them, the old woman combed out her long flaxen ringlets with a golden comb, and the glossy curls hung down on each side of the little round pleasant face, which looked fresh and blooming as a rose. "I have long been wishing for a dear little maiden like you," said the old woman, and now you must stay with me and see how happily we shall live together." And while she went on combing little Gerda's hair, she thought less and less about her adopted brother Kay, for the old woman could conjure. Although she was not a wicked witch, she conjured only a little for her own amusement, and now because she wanted to keep Gerda. Therefore she went into the garden and stretched out her crutch towards all the rose trees, beautiful though they were, and they immediately sunk into the dark earth, so that no one could tell where they had once stood. The old woman was afraid that if little Gerda saw roses, she would think of those at home, and then remember little Kay and run away. Then she took Gerda into the flower garden. How fragrant and beautiful it was! Every flower that could be thought of for every season of the year was here in full bloom. No picture book could have more beautiful colors. Gerda jumped for joy and played till the sun went down behind the tall cherry trees. Then she slept in an elegant bed with red silk pillows embroidered with colored violets. And then she dreamed as pleasantly as a queen on her wedding day. The next day, and for many days after, Gerda played with the flowers in the warm sunshine. She knew every flower, and yet although there were so many of them, it seemed as if one were missing. But which it was, she could not tell. One day, however, as she sat looking at the old woman's hat with the painted flowers on it, she saw that the prettiest of them all was a rose. The old woman had forgotten to take it from her hat when she made all the roses sink into the earth. But it is difficult to keep the thoughts together in everything. One little mistake upset all our arrangements. "What? Are there no roses here?" cried Gerda. And she ran out into the garden and examined all the beds and searched and searched. There was not one to be found. Then she sat down and wept, and her tears fell just on the place where one of the rose trees had sunk down. The warm tears moistened the earth, and the rose tree sprouted up at once, as blooming as when it had sunk. And Gerda embraced it and kissed the roses and thought of the beautiful roses at home, and with them of little Kay. "Oh, how I've been detained," said the little maiden. "I wanted to seek for little Kay. Do you know where he is?" she asked the roses. "Do you think he's dead?" And the roses answered, "No, he's not dead. We've been in the ground where all the dead lie, but Kay is not there." "Thank you," said little Gerda. And then she went to the other flowers and looked into their little cups and asked, "Do you know where little Kay is?" But each flower, as it stood in the sunshine, dreamed only of its own little fairy tale of history. Not one knew anything of Kay. Gerda heard many stories from the flowers as she asked them one after another about him. "And what?" said the tiger lily. "Hark, do you hear the drum? Turn, turn, there are only 2 notes. Always turn, turn. Listen to the woman's song of mourning. Hear the cry of the priest. In her long red robe stands the Hindu widow by the funeral pile. The flames rise around her as she places herself on the dead body of her husband. But the Hindu woman is thinking of the living one in that circle, of him, her son who lighted those flames. Those shining eyes troubled her heart more painfully than the flames which will soon consume her body to ashes. Can the fire of the heart be extinguished in the flames of the funeral pile?" "I don't understand that at all," said little Gerda. "That is my story," said the tiger lily. "What says the convolvulus?" "Near yonder narrow road stands an old knight's castle. Thick ivy creeps over the old ruined walls, leaf over leaf even to the balcony, in which stands a beautiful maiden. She bends over the balustrades and looks up the road. No rose on its stem is fresher than she. No apple blossom, wafted by the wind, floats more lightly than she moves. Her rich silk rustles as she bends over and exclaims, 'Will he not come?'" "Is it Kay you mean?" asked Gerda. "I am only speaking of a story of my dream," replied the flower. What said the little snowdrop? "Between 2 trees a rope is hanging. There is a piece of board upon it. It is a swing. 2 pretty little girls in dresses white as snow and with long green ribbons fluttering from their hats are sitting upon it swinging. Their brother, who is taller than they are, stands in the swing. He has one arm round the rope to steady himself. In one hand he holds a little bowl, and in the other a clay pipe. He's blowing bubbles. As the swing goes on, the bubbles fly upward, reflecting the most beautiful varying colors. The last still hangs from the bowl of the pipe and sways in the wind. On goes the swing, and then a little black dog comes running up. He's almost as light as the bubble, and he raises himself on his hind legs and wants to be taken into the swing. But it does not stop, and the dog falls. Then he barks and gets angry. The children stoop towards him, and the bubble bursts. A swinging plank, a light sparkling foam picture. That is my story. What do the hyacinths say? There were 3 beautiful sisters, fair and delicate. The dress of one was red, of the second blue, and of the third pure white. Hand in hand they danced in the bright moonlight by the calm lake, but they were human beings, not fairy elves. The sweet fragrance attracted them, and they disappeared in the wood. Here the fragrance became stronger. 3 coffins in which lay 3 beautiful maidens glided from the thickest part of the forest across the lake. The fireflies flew lightly over them like little floating torches. Do the dancing maidens sleep, or are they dead? The scent of the flowers says that they are corpses. The evening bell tolls their knell. You make me quite sorrowful, said little Gerda. Your perfume is so strong, you make me think of the dead maidens. Oh, is little Kay really dead then? The roses have been in the earth and they say no. Cling, clang, told the hyacinth bells. We are not tolling for little Kay. We do not know him. We sing our song, the only one we know. Then Gerda went to the buttercups that were glittering amongst the bright green leaves. You are like bright suns, said Gerda. Tell me if you know where I can find my playfellow. And the buttercups sparkled gaily and looked again at Gerda. What song could the buttercups sing? It was not about Kay. The bright warm sun shone on a little court on the first warm day of spring. His bright beams rested on the white walls of the neighboring house, and close by bloomed the first yellow flower of the season. Glittering like gold in the sun's warm ray, an old woman sat in her armchair at the house door, and her granddaughter, a poor and pretty servant maid, came to see her for a short visit. When she kissed her grandmother, there was gold everywhere, the gold of the heart in that holy kiss. It was a golden morning. There was gold in the beaming sunlight, gold in the leaves of the lowly flower, and on the lips of the maiden. There, that is my story, said the buttercup. My poor old grandmother, sighed Gerda. She's longing to see me and grieving for me as she did for little Kay. But I shall soon go home now and take little Kay with me. It is no use asking the flowers. They know only their own songs and can give me no information. And then she tucked up her little dress, that she might run faster, but the narcissus caught her by the leg as she was jumping over it. So she stopped and looking at the tall yellow flower and said, Perhaps you may know something. Then she stooped down quite close to the flower and listened. And what did he say? I can see myself. I can see myself, said the narcissus. Oh, how sweet is my perfume. Up in a little room with a bow window stands a little dancing girl half undressed, and she stands sometimes on one leg, and sometimes on both, and looks as if she would tread the whole world under her feet. She's nothing but a delusion. She is pouring water out of a teapot on a piece of stuff which she holds in her hand. It is her bodice. Cleanliness is a good thing, she says. Her white dress hangs on a peg. It has also been washed in the teapot and dried on the roof. She puts it on and ties a saffron-colored handkerchief round her neck, which makes the dress look wider. See how she stretches out her legs, as if she were showing off on a stem. I can see myself. I can see myself. What do I care for all that? Said Gerda. You need not tell me such stuff. And then she ran to the other end of the garden. The door was fastened, but she pressed against the rusty latch and it gave way. The door sprang open and little Gerda ran out with bare feet into the wide world. She looked back 3 times, but no one seemed to be following her. At last she could run no longer, so she sat down to rest on a great stone, And when she looked round, she saw that the summer was over and autumn very far advanced. She had known nothing of this in the beautiful garden, where the sun shone and the flowers grew all the year round. "Oh, how I have wasted my time," said little Gerda. "It is autumn. I must not rest any longer." And she rose up to go on. But her little feet were wounded and sore, and everything around her looked so cold and bleak. The long willow leaves were quite yellow. The dewdrops fell like water, leaf after leaf dropped from the trees. The sloe thorn alone still bore fruit, but the sloes were sour and set the teeth on edge. Oh, how dark and weary the whole world appeared. Thank you for joining Freya's Fairy Tales. Be sure to come back next week for the conclusion of Settle's journey to holding her own fairy tale in her hands, and to hear another of her favorite fairy tales.